So you live in Fort Collins and you've seen the ADU news, the accessory dwelling unit news. The news, if you look at the headlines, is wow, every residential lot in Fort Collins can now build an ADU or a detached unit on their lot, no matter where they're at. Doesn't matter HOA. So you're wondering, how does this affect you? Should I think about building an ADU? Oh my gosh, is my neighborhood going to become flooded with ADUs and a bunch of people? Well, I'll put some of those fears to rest and give you a little detail as to what the new rule changes look like. I'm Chris Mullenberg, founder of the Mullenberg team here in Fort Collins, Colorado, your go-to real estate team, and here to keep you informed on what's happening. And especially around ADUs, this has been a big back and forth for a lot of months and even years in Fort Collins as to the density. Folks in the city trying to get more affordable housing, more housing options to keep home prices and rent prices down. So it's been a lot of back and forth, but now the city council has decided to go ahead and get ahead of the state. Because if you remember, the state of Colorado said that all towns of our size must allow ADUs as of July 1st, 2025. So Fort Collins actually has now gotten ahead of that. Final vote on this is going to be February 5th, but it's pretty much already in motion. So Fort Collins is getting out ahead of the July 1st deadline for ADU rule changes. So what actually does this mean and what hoops need to be jumped through for an ADU to happen on a residential lot? Okay, so for years, you had to have a certain lot size. You had to be in a certain zone in order to build an ADU or a detached dwelling unit or an attached dwelling unit even. So now that's going to change. Every residential lot in Fort Collins, no matter where you're at, what your zoning is, what your HOA says, you're going to be eligible for an ADU. What the city cannot do is require additional parking. Okay, that was a big deal, was you had to have off-street parking for every unit you ever built. Now that's not going to be the case. So that's one limiting factor removed. The state also says the city cannot use prohibitive measures to limit ADUs. They have to remain open and allow people to do them. And they can't require a public hearing for an ADU to be approved. A couple things the city can do, though, they can limit short-term rentals. So if you've been around Fort Collins for any amount of time, you know that short-term rental license is hard to come by. The city has been pretty tight about short-term rentals. So you can't just add an Airbnb with an ADU. The city can still have some prohibitiveness around short-term rentals. City can also, of course, require more hoops to jump through or not allow ADUs if you're in a historic preservation. So if you got an old home in, say, Old Town, you've got a historic designation, you may need to look into that. You may run into some roadblocks. And then another thing that the city can do is require that there's enough water capacity for the property. So they need to get a letter from a water service provider saying, yes, there's enough capacity for this additional unit and more folks living on property. So before you freak out about, there's going to be a hodgepodge of different ADUs and a whole bunch of things going up in my neighborhood, there still are going to be some design regulations. So of course, ADU still has to meet the setback standards for your zoning. So they can't just, pack the lot full of ADUs. So don't worry on that. And also the height restrictions still have to be met. So you're not going to end up with a 3-story something next to your house. Check the height restrictions in your zone for that. But just know that ADU means it can be an attached or a detached unit. So this could be something out in the backyard. It could be put into a detached garage, could be a freestanding unit that's its own thing, or it could become something like an apartment built out in a basement, or, you pop the top on your house and you do an apartment upstairs. So is this going to change the face of Fort Collins overnight? Absolutely not. I mean, one of the arguments from the NIMBY or the Not in My Backyard crew that's been in Fort Collins saying, hey, we don't want to allow just density on density and more people and no parking requirements. There's been a lot of pushback on this because people want to maintain their neighborhood feel, don't want to feel overcrowded. But now that this is going through, I encourage people, don't worry. It's not like Fort Collins all of a sudden overnight in the next year or two going to be packed with ADUs, a bunch of rentals, cars everywhere. Honestly, the cost of building an ADU, I mean, if you've done any sort of construction or remodel, you know where construction costs are at nowadays. I mean, it is seriously prohibitive for a lot of homeowners to even consider building an ADU, detached or attached. So this is not going to be an overnight. This is going to be a very slow burn. Probably you'll see the growth over the next number of years, but it's not going to be huge or a big tidal wave of density in Fort Collins. You own property in Fort Collins, you're wondering, hey, is an ADU make sense? I mean, do the numbers make sense? Should I consider doing one? Should I consider making a rental? Um, Go ahead and comment ADU on this video. And I've got an ADU calculator where you can actually run the numbers and say, okay, here's what construction costs would look like if I did say rent that unit. Of course, not short term guaranteed, but it's even a long term rental. How many years does it make sense to pay that off? Is it a smart investment? Should I maybe just consider going and buying a rental property? So if you're thinking about real estate investment or thinking about investing in your property, go ahead and comment ADU. You'll get my ADU calculator, and happy to run a scenario with you, strategize this just to see, does it even make sense? Does it impact you for the better or worse?